We have Reina Lewis, another speaker here all the way from London. She has published extensively on the modest body and Muslim fashion, and she's a lecturer at London College of Fashion, and so it's my pleasure to introduce her paper, which is titled Modest Body Politics, Faith, Fashion, and Ethnicity.
Well, good afternoon. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and I would like to thank Valerie and Emma and the entire team here at the Museum at MFIT for inviting me to participate in this wonderful symposium. The plus side of speaking later in the day is that many of the wonderful ideas have already been put in the room. The bad side is that I want to rewrite everything in light of what I've heard. So I need to keep to time. I'm just going to make a couple of little catch-up interjections. And also, I have stripped out most of the scholarly referencing and name-checking just to save time. A lot of the people whose work I have learned so much from are with us here in the room today. And for any of you who are researching in this area and want any more of that apparatus, then I'll be happy to do that later. Oh my. The management of the body is of significance for many religions, including contemporary Christianity. We might think about religions with distinctive rules regarding the feeding of the body, such as kosher and halal food, or the many rituals for cleansing or baptizing the body. Distinctions between religions. Oh, I forgot my opening thing. Sorry, I'd scribbled it at the top. I'm going to do it. So I wanted to start by saying, whilst popular understandings of prevailing Protestant Christian religious cultures might foreground a hierarchical split between the mind and the body in religious doctrine and expression, the management of the body is of significance for many religions, including contemporary Christianity. It makes sense now. So we could think about feeding or washing the body. We could think about distinctions between religions and also about how these distinctions between religions are matched by blending between religious traditions, typical of what sociologists call everyday or daily religion. As Meredith Maguire argues, this approach allows us to understand that how people live their daily spiritual and religious beliefs may be characterized by syncretic mixing between religions and by apparent inconsistency. So, for example, Orthodox Jews may happily sign up for yoga classes without thinking that they are joining another religion. Yet in India, Hindu nationalists under Modi might want yoga re-sacralized as Hindu religious practice, and at the same time, in some Christian schools in North America, schools won't permit yoga on the premises because it's a foreign and alien religion. As Nancy Ammerman explains, these boundary disputes should be regarded not as the policing of already firm distinctions between discrete institutional religious institutions, but rather as exercises in moral boundary making. They create boundaries. And all the while, Lululemon sells yoga pants. Using the frame of daily religion also, therefore, allows us to focus on the blending between the sacred and the profane, and between the religious and the commercial. While 27% of Americans say that they are spiritual, not religious, it becomes clear that the secularization thesis did not come to pass. It has not been the case that modernity and industrialization brought about the end of religion as an organizing principle in personal ethics or in state and community life. In discussions about the revisibilization of religion in a post-secular society, I'm interested in how consumer cultures provision and shape the diverse ways in which people now elect to craft their personal spiritual or religious practices. When it comes to the embodied expression of religious cultures, modest fashion, commerce, and commentary has played a key role in validating and arbitrating definitions of religious, spiritual, and ethno-religious authenticity. For women who see themselves as part of a cross-faith modest fashion movement, an ideal of respecting individual women's choices about how, when, and if the body should be covered is paramount, although it is often difficult to maintain. So today, I'm going to focus on the ethics of inclusivity and how they are strained by two perceived distinctions in embodiment. I'm looking at the body marked by ethnicity and the body marked by size. And today, I'm going to focus on Muslim modest fashion, but related debates can also be found in other religious and spiritual contexts. Modest commodities don't simply cover an already pious self. For some Muslim women, as Saba Mahmood discusses, and she's writing about the early piety movements in Egypt in the beginning of the global Islamic revival in the mid-20th century, she says the daily act of dressing the body in a modest dress and a headscarf or hijab helps cultivate a pious disposition. This is an important reminder of the active role of garments, their acquisition and their styling in the creation of identity and social place. Today, dress and dressing also function to form the social and political self. We might think of Muslim women who wear the hijab to provide a social alibi to parents or elders, and of those who wear the hijab to reclaim a sign of stigma, particularly after 9/11. And I note that Munira Ahmed, whose image you see here, repurposed in the famous poster by Shepard Fairey in his We the People series, is not herself a hijab wearer. Canadian brand Nooka on the right there produce what they call expressive scarves, which can be worn on the head or as an accessory, and women and men can mark themselves as Muslim with a Muslim t-shirt. Women use social media to show support across faith and across secular and faith divides for women's rights to freedom of religious expression. Now, at root is a commitment to inclusivity and to multiple forms of modest presentation. And underwriting this is an awareness that styles of religious and religio-ethnic presentation change, including covering, stop covering, and sometimes covering. This is Winnie Detwa, the blogger, Nadia Azmi, who blogged. She was the turban queen when she was wearing her hijab, her turban, and who continued blogging when she stopped. Muslim women who cover and who don't cover criticize the tendency to regard hijab as the litmus test of female piety, as if women who don't cover are automatically not pious. Many would argue that behavior, not clothing, should be the true indicator of moral and religious identity and integrity. Unsurprisingly, racialized norms of beauty play out in the modest fashion sector. Islam, of course, is not an ethnicity. But in the US, as elsewhere in the West, mosques have often developed as mono-ethnic, taking cultural norms as religious conventions. For the young and youngish women that constitute the main core of the new Muslim modest fashionistas, the multi-ethnic nature of the Ummah, the imagined community of all Muslims globally, is very important. Civil liberties and feminist approaches frame religious rights as human rights. An ideal of cross-ethnic religious connectivity among pioneering brands and journalists was often signaled by using models of visible ethnic diversity, and I'm showing Muslim Girl here. More recent brands, this is Norka again, provide products to suit varied skin tones, such as their hijab range, their basic colors. Not surprisingly, given the market stats for Muslim modest consumers, Rihanna's Fenty campaign featured now famous Muslim hijabi model Halima Aden. Fenty's USP, as you'll know, is producing products for an inclusive spectrum of skin colors. And here, the body of the Somali American refugee, Aden, doubles down on racial, religious, and social inclusion in the brand's messaging. Not long ago, mainstream brands were aversive to being publicly associated with Muslims. Magazines couldn't get adverts or pull product for editorial shoots. Bloggers couldn't get promotions or sponsorship. Now, as fashion and cosmetic industries begin to mainstream diversity, attachment to visible religious distinction becomes an asset. With the global Muslim spend on all apparel estimated at $2,213 billion by 2021, it's not surprising that brands want to reach out to a valuable consumer segment. And I was thinking when Lauren was talking about the size of the plus size market, and Julia and I, who's speaking next, were talking about the older consumer, to some extent when you make the market case, the business case, then the brands listen. Clearly, some brands feel able to message this in their campaigns without fear of alienating other consumers. It may even be an asset in appealing to non-Muslim consumers who want to be associated with brands who appear woke to religious as well as racial inclusivity. But the body under the clothes means that not all bodies can be as easily coded as modest when normative visualities prevail. Margari Aziza in 2015 described how racial norms about good hair are welded onto popular conviction about good and bad hijab to position women with natural afro hair as morally inadequate. And this picture is of her wearing her hijab at the annual convention of the Islamic Society of North America, ISNA. She writes, "As Muslims, our natural hair exposes us to being asked, 'What do you have under your scarf?' one time too many." The question is then followed with reminders about the hadith that describes women whose, quote, "heads swear like camel humps," end quote, who will reside in hell. The hadiths, the sayings attributed to the Prophet, this is an often used hadith which many feminists and scholars would say is of weaker authority than some others, but it's having a real second life and often appears on social media in criticisms. And here's just one illustration that I picked up off the internet. She goes on to say several black Muslim women have told similar stories about being told something is wrong with them because of the shape of their hijab. In this instance, my point is that the normative body against which Aziza and her hair is found wanting is not necessarily the tall, slim, Caucasian body of the Western fashion imaginary. Though mainstream fashion norms are unavoidably part of the framing for Muslim dressing in the West, norms of hijab beauty are also informed by the histories of cultural ascendancy that have privileged Arab cultures as originating closer to the land of the Prophet. In this instance, good hair for hijab styling may be hair closest to European-style tresses, but it is also to include Arab hair and some forms of Asian hair as well as Caucasian. As Aziza recounts, quote, "The politics of hair even extends to the Middle East and North Africa. When I lived in Kuwait and Egypt, rocking an afro was like an act of resistance." She goes on to say that natural hair and the expertise in caring for it remains a political act, even, I would say, as the styling comes in and out of fashion. The celebrity cult of the Kardashians, who we saw earlier, may have brought elements of the black body, notably the butt, into vogue. But for those not living in the rarefied realm of superstardom, the fashionability of certain types of physiognomy does not save the same body parts from future stigma. Charlie Brinkhurst Cuff, writing last year in the British newspaper The Guardian, says, quote, "that whilst my body shape may be in fashion now, I do worry that it will be a struggle to remember how to love my body as the traits associated with blackness fall from grace." Fashion-led social media have played a key role in visibilizing the black Muslim body. Digital campaigns such as #BlackoutEid showed black Muslim women, men, children in seasonal finery. Social media was utilized to create an assertive gallery of contemporary African-American dressed identity, challenging the tendency to take Arab or Asian cultural forms as normative of all Islam. As New York Muslim American blogger and activist Najma Sharif pointed out, within hours of the hashtag launching, she says, #BlackoutEid was trending everywhere from Abuja to Seattle, Toronto, London, and Minneapolis. Black Muslims flooded the Twitter sphere with photos in their most swagged out, beautiful outfits, showing the world that black is indeed beautiful. Black Power's body-positive strategies and the slogan, "Black is Beautiful," manifest in new transnational visualities that are created and circulated by the speed of digital social media. and of course the increased reach of internet infrastructure. In contrast, one African-American Muslim Instagrammer found that social media platforms can also silence and suppress the curvy black body. Having achieved major shopping success by finding a pair of jeans that fitted at the waist and at the hips, blogger Misky Muse found that her celebratory post was taken down by Instagram after a person unknown apparently flagged it as inappropriate. It's evident that modest dressers struggle to uphold a non-judgmental ideal in the face of real differences of opinion. But as Teen Vogue noted in their commentary on this incident, bodies are judged through a racialized lens. Teen Vogue's consider, they say at Teen Vogue, our culture's complicated history of hypersexualizing black female bodies, and you can understand just what an infuriating position Misky occupies. She couldn't identify the person behind the original complaint, and Misky Muse contextualizes the algorithmic verdict in relation to, quote, centuries of male policing of women's bodies. She goes on to say, I don't believe in comparing myself to other women because they're not my competition. But the harsh reality is that it's easier to be a slimmer hijabi wearing this same outfit. Bay Area blogger Minara El-Rahman makes a similar link between ethnicity and size in terms of visible diversity and market offer. In her blog, Hijabi Life, she reposted comments that only one of the social media influencers who was flown into Dubai for Modest Fashion Week in December 2017 appeared to be black. She writes, so this is Minara El-Rahman on Hijabi Life, she writes, the struggle for diversity in the Muslim fashion world is very real. It seems that the ideal Muslim fashion blogger is thin, light-skinned, and very much like an actual fashion blogger with a hijab on top of her head. While these bloggers work very hard to create beautiful content, there are so many more of us who attempt to shed light on the fact that Muslims are a 1 billion-plus deep population with so many more faces and bodies. Her post complicates the presumption that the growing power of digital content producers as the new influencers of fashion will necessarily democratize the fashion establishment. And as Joe already pointed out this morning, piece in the press recently pointing out that the press, when they're remediating street style from the fashion weeks, inevitably choose thin white women. The visual self-imaging of first-rung Instagram stars like Susie Lau, Brian Bai, and Karen Blanchard has brought some visible ethnic diversity to the fashion media. So too is religious diversity in fashion marketing, now seen in the Muslim-marked bodies of Halima Aden, and before that in H&M, where they made a star, well, being in this video for H&M, made a star of Londoner Maria Idrissi. So too is religious cultural identity now visibilized in bodies not marked as Muslim by dress and comportment, such as the supermodel Hadid sisters, who have self-identified as Muslim, Palestinian, migrant, and refugee. But for women who want clothing that enables the cultivation and expression of Muslim identities, pious and also cultural and political, Al-Rahman's lament on Hijabi Life makes clear that limits in representation match up to limits in the market offer. She says, for me, it's always been a struggle to find modest clothing that will actually fit and flatter a curvy body type. Admit it, how many of you even follow a plus size or curvy modest fashion blogger? And we might think, of course, also of Vernon Lee, who I haven't put up for time today. Najma Sharif argues that white supremacy, quote, is why black Muslim women aren't as visible as Arab and white Muslim women. She goes on also to criticize those One Ummah clothing brands who promote an ideal of inclusion among the worldwide community of Muslim believers. For her, the legacy of racialized beauty norms excludes the characteristics of the black female body. She says, I learned very early that no matter what I wear, I can't achieve this idea of modesty. My body is inherently immodest. The bigger, darker, and curvier a black Muslim woman is, the more and more difficult it becomes for her to be considered modest. Even in hijab, white femininity is the apex of modesty. Our black bodies are rendered immodest, hypersexual and invisible and hypervisible simultaneously. So what is available on the market? At a moment when both the plus size and Muslim fashion markets are experiencing expansion, diversification, and segmentation, I'm going to close with a few examples and some cautions for the route forward. As the Muslim modest niche sector expands, a few brands are now positioning themselves at the intersection between Muslim modesty and plus-size inclusivity. Launched in 2013, Styled by Zubaydah carries all lines in sizes 10 to 24. Founder and designer Zubaydah Abdul Hakim told Nylon magazine, quote, "Being on the large side is so taboo in the Muslim fashion industry. Few carry sizes over bigger than XL, and those that do don't design those pieces to be proportionate for a curvy woman's body." With curve fast emerging as a preferred term for plus-size positivity, their website proclaims, "We believe that style has no size, and curvy girls need love too." Emerging from the Afro-American style conventions of the Nation of Islam in 1981, Al-Nisa Designs is one of the longest running American modest fashion brands. Selected by the Dubai-based Islamic Fashion and Design Council to show at their first European event in Torino, Italy last year, the company's, we're not there. There we go. The company's modern take on the nation's Black Pride aesthetics is available custom-made to all sizes. Designer Carmen Mohammed and her team embody the uniform dress codes of the nation to press-worthy effect, whilst showing individuated riffs on a theme for broader catwalk appeal, which is what you're seeing at the top left. The ethos of respecting women and their bodies extends to making modesty and comfort possible for those who are not religious adherents. Larger women from any background do the maths and work out that designers of modest fashion will likely be more sensitive to women's body issues. American Muslim designer Nzinga Knight, who will be familiar to many of you as the first hijabi on Project Runway in 2014, reflected that, quote, "Plus-size women are invested in the idea of being more modestly covered generally." She clarifies that this is not necessarily for reasons of religion, but because, quote, "of a certain body consciousness that I think plus-size women end up having that I'm sure society also encourages or puts on them." Making religion newly visible in the public sphere, modest fashion commerce and social commentary are important sites for the staging of boundary disputes about what counts as appropriate religious body management. Bound up in the practice of religion in the everyday, modest fashion commodities may also arbitrate resolutions to those dilemmas. I'm serving as consulting curator for the upcoming exhibition Contemporary Muslim Fashions at the De Young Museum in San Francisco, for which we've thought long and hard about how to stage the physique of Muslim fashion. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing your thoughts and comments today. Thank you.
Don't go anywhere, Reina. Anybody have any questions that they'd like to come forward?
Okay. Oh, thank you, Jo.
Hello, Rina. I actually want to follow up that last point. Given the emphasis you've placed on the differences of the body underneath the clothes, the staging of the exhibition, how are you thinking about the mannequins? How are you going to reflect the diversity of bodies under the hijab? Obviously you're thinking about that, but what kinds of thoughts?
And I'm not a curator, and I know that there will be many people who have professional expertise here in the room on that. It's been a really vexed issue. One of them is about the skin tone on the mannequins, and how you represent, we've got designers from Indonesia, from across the world involved in it, as well as, of course, the diversity of the American population. So size and skin tone is an issue. And also how we're going to do the hijab, because as we saw earlier, very often a mannequin doesn't have a head. So if you're going to put a headscarf on, how are you going to do it? And also, who in the museum's curatorial staff has that expertise? So one of the things we've been doing is working closely with local Muslim communities to get guidance on that, and we're going to be working with some local Muslim fashion stylists. But it's really, really a vexed issue, and I think this is an issue for any fashion exhibition, I know. And if you're doing a fashion exhibition in the fine art mode of fashion, then you're sort of assuming on an audience that are literate in that and that know that you're going to show on these elongated model forms that aren't a real size. When you're doing something that you know is going to get both a fashion audience and diverse community audiences, and community audiences who so far have suffered from a lack of representation in museums, then they're going to want to see themselves. And that's really, really hard. If we already had 300 exhibitions on Muslim fashion, it wouldn't matter so much.
The template would be there, or you'd have something to refer to, but you're...
Yeah, or this would be the one that did it like that,
Yeah.
and the other exhibition would be the one that did it like that. It's the same issue that the magazine editors faced. The magazines in 2005, 2010 would get more criticism about their fashion pages than anything else, because that's where people want to see themselves. Now, when we read Vogue or any other fashion magazine, there is an ongoing discussion about whether it looks real, but we're also tutored in a certain mode of reading and consumption. So we're still working on it. It's really, really difficult. I'd be happy to take ideas from people after.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I see somebody standing behind you. Have I got time for one more? Can I? Okay. Oh, or two more? Yeah, sure.
Okay. I was just wondering, with like the visibility of something like a hijab going up, like with Marc Jacobs having, headscarves on the runway, and the upcoming Met exhibition being based on Catholicism.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know your take on like high fashion's use of religion, because at times I think it has come across as superficial. So I just wanted to know your take on high fashion's version of like what it means to be a religious person wearing like fashionable clothes.
Thank you for that. It's a really good point, because high fashion designers talk about taking, quote, inspiration from everything from, quote, tribal cultures to religions. And it's a real, I'm very interested to see that the debate about cultural appropriation is having more attention and drive again at the moment. And that to me is very interesting. So I think that it's very mixed. Fashion designers at the couture level adopt and appropriate all different sorts of things. And of course, I think it is important. If you adopt things from a culture, but you're not showing any real knowledge or respect or learning from the people for whom that is part of their culture, then for me, that is a real issue. I think there's a difference when it's different types of religion as well, because there's majority religions and there's religions in different contexts that are minority. So to some extent, you've got more leeway. The show at the Met is about Catholicism, and it's about Roman Catholicism. It's not about the Eastern Orthodox churches, for example. So there's a whole host of people that are going to be not included in that. But also you have an enormous institution there to work with. And I've been watching that, and I've not spoken with them about it. But I think what's very interesting is that they're working with the Vatican, and I'm sure it took them years to develop those relationships. The Roman Catholic Church is a centralized organization. If you want a diktat about you can show it this way, you can consult your contact at the Vatican. Islam is not a centralized religious organization. We don't get to do that. You couldn't do that with Judaism either. So it's a really interesting question, and there's much room for getting it wrong. And that's true also for people from within the faith. The diversity of opinion means that, there's going to be a number of different readings. Thank you. Can we do one? Yeah?
Okay.
Thank you.
I want to better understand the value or aesthetical choice of wearing, covering up. And looking at the Middle East particularly, and understanding that covering up has started from Mesopotamian times, and there's documentation of women being covered up. So it seems like it's more than a just religious issue, it's a cultural value. And in explaining that, how do you explain the cultural aspect or the tradition of women who choose to be covered up? when, when the person has been in a society where that is something that's truly, truly valued, in contrast to what Western notion of, that these women are covered up because of, religious reasons, that it's just beyond religion. How do you explain that?
As you point out, the practice of covering the head, of headscarves or veiling, is pre-Islamic in origin. And in the Middle East, it was practiced by women from many different communities. And very often it impacted more on urban rather than rural women. And very often it signified social status, as with practices of spatial seclusion and segregation. So enslaved women, for example, might be moving about the city without covering their heads. Elite women weren't. There are women of other religions who also cover now, but very often a headscarf is seen as something that's to do with Islam and Muslims. And there are some Muslims that would present it that way and understand it that way. I think that what's very important to understand is that women who are choosing to cover their hair are doing it for a whole host of reasons. And of course, within the modest fashion movement, the ideal of supporting women in their choices also acknowledges that there are many women in the world who aren't in a position to choose, whether it's forced, and so many women would say it's just as wrong to force a woman to cover, whether it's in Iran or Saudi Arabia or ISIS-controlled territories or community elders in New York, as it is to force her to uncover, whether it's in Quebec or in France or in Germany. But the idea of choice is prevalent for a lot of people, and there is clearly an increase among young Muslims around the world in covering their head and in covering their body in different ways. As an external observer, we can't always know why that is. Because like all dress, forms of cover or modest dress is polyvalent. It means different things to different viewers at the same time. So I think it's really about understanding that, as you say, it can be about social context, it can be the way you're dressing for work, it can be the way you're dressing for a community event, and it can also be that you've adapted the way that you would prefer to dress because of the social constraints of the environment that you're in.
In your exhibition for the young, are you partnering with women from Islamic Faith to ensure their perspective being represented in the exhibition?
We've been very lucky to work with a number of Muslim designers and creative entrepreneurs from around the world, and also fashion bloggers and influencers, because we want to have social media as part of the primary sources, in a way. In the exhibition. And also we've been able to consult with members of local Muslim communities and also other advisors on our advisory council. And of course there's a lot of different opinion, and one of the challenges for the curators and for the museum is to negotiate that, is to accept that we're not going to be able to make everybody happy. It's really hard navigating a route through that says this is how it's being presented at this time in this iteration.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.